Okay. Good evening, everybody. Welcome back to Exploring the Lord of the Rings. This is session 55 and our third session on chapter 10 of book 1 of the Fellowship of the Ring. We return to our conversation with Strider, and we are just about to get Butterbur's intervention into that conversation. And we've been looking a lot at the dynamics between Frodo and Strider, and in particular kind of trying to think about things from Strider's point of view, figure out in part sort of why he's doing what he's doing. And sort of what this conversation looks like from his point of view as well. So we're going to get right back into that in just a minute. Good evening, everybody. First, before we got started, I just wanted to make a couple announcements. The very first thing I wanted to announce is I am doing a special session this Thursday evening at 9:30 p.m. Eastern Time. I'll be broadcasting it. I should be broadcasting it on Twitch, I think, unless there's any conflicts. But in any case, we'll be on the NetMoot on GoToWebinar, and I can post the link for that, the registration link for that session there in the Twitch chat, and then here also in the Discord chat as well. What this is usually every year, once a year, I do my State of the University address, kind of give people an update with what's going on at Signum University. We have some really big, exciting updates going on. We have come to a momentous. I feel like Thorin. It is a solemn moment. It's a big moment now for Signum University, and I wanted to share that with you. Give you guys an update as to what's going on. And it's pretty exciting. So I hope you'll join me on Thursday evening at 9:30. While we share that. And of course, if you think it's connected to that big book of documentation I was waving around last Tuesday night, you would be correct. But anyway, okay. So, excellent. Oh, so is anybody else having audio problems? You guys are hearing me, right? I'm pretty sure you guys are hearing me on Twitch. Is everybody hearing me on Discord? Is that all right? Okay. All right, cool. Good. Excellent. Just want to make sure. Okay, so please do join me on Thursday evening. That'll be a lot of fun. And another place you can join me a little bit further down the road is going to be London Moot. London Moot is going to be awesome. That's going to happen on the 28th of April, Saturday, April 28th. So if you can... if you are near enough to get into London for the 28th, I hope you'll be able to join us. Go to londonmoot.com and you'll be able to find all the registration information there. Going to be a great time, lots of awesome people, and I'm really looking forward to getting to meet you guys. So anyway, great. So just the two things I wanted one to inform you of, one to remind you of, and I hope you will get to join me on Thursday night, because this is an occasion that I have been preparing for and building for 7 years. So I am pretty excited about this. All right. So let's continue back to chapter 10. I've there are a bunch of good observations on the discussion board. One note I would generally make, some people have a tendency to make very long posts on the discussion board, which is really cool, and there's often a lot of really good stuff, but it's really hard for me to integrate those and respond to those because they're very long. So shorter bits are going to be a little easier for me to integrate and talk about during class here. So, however, having said that, there is one that I actually split up into two screens here today because I thought it was worth it. And I'm pretty sure that I noticed earlier on, John Castles, man, see, look at this. I'm going to post your excellent question and talk about it. I'm ready to heap all this praise on you. And then I see you posted a screen name trolling me tonight here, right? Come on now, John. What's that all about? But anyway, here is John's excellent post on Strider. I thought this was some really good analysis and some really good close reading. He says, in episode 53, we had a lot of trouble explaining why Strider would intentionally sound rascalish when he speaks to the hobbits in their rooms. Could it be that it's the best way to make the hobbits listen? At the end of chapter 9, Frodo was afraid in a very general way. Part of why he began to suspect even old Butterbur's fat face of concealing dark designs is because he can't identify what he's afraid of specifically, so he's prepared to be afraid of anything. If Strider were to come in, offer a full explanation of who he is and why the hobbits should trust him, I don't think the hobbits could get past their general fear and believe him. They may even refuse to listen outright. After all, listening to reassurances from someone who wants to do you harm can only hurt you. But by seeming to be a trickster, the hobbits, Strider makes the hobbits want to listen. They want to ask questions so they can see the trick. They want to challenge him on the assumption that he will fail those challenges and they can see him off. This gives Strider the chance he needs to convince them. So continuing, he says, consider this passage. Oh, indeed, replied Frodo, surprised but not much relieved. Even if I wanted another companion, I should not agree to any such thing until I knew a good deal more about you and your business. This is a rhetorical challenge from Frodo. He's forcing Strider to either explain his business or leave. He doesn't think there's a chance that Strider will explain his business, so he thinks he's forcing Strider to leave. Instead, this gives Strider exactly the chance he needed to explain himself. After saying that, Frodo can't object when Strider starts to explain his business. I think that this is part of what Strider means when he says you seem to be coming to your senses again, and that is all to the good. He's not just saying that it's good Frodo is being more cautious, he's saying that it's good that Frodo is being specific about his fears, and saying that he would need to know he would need to know to sensibly set them aside. The same thing happens when Frodo challenges, Mr. Strider may have an honest reason for spying and eavesdropping, but if so, I should advise him to explain it. Frodo thinks that Strider can't have an answer, but Frodo can't really object when Strider offers the explanation. You can see this through the whole conversation. It's the Hobbit's own defensiveness which gives Strider the opportunity to explain himself. I just can't see him getting the same chance if he didn't make them think he was a rascal to begin with. And I think that's a really, good observation. Really, I think that Lincoln, you're right. So in the Discord chat tonight, Jonathan Castles, who posted this excellent post, has logged in with his screen name, John Balrogs Have Wings Castles. So that's what I was castigating him for earlier on. Anyway, so. This is a really interesting concept, John, and I think it's definitely worth thinking about. That especially since, of course, you think about the atmosphere kind of a reputation, right, that Strider has cultivated here in Bree. I do have kind of a rascally look, have I not? Right? He says, as we pointed out last time, almost boastingly, like he's a little bit proud of the success of the disguise that he has used there in Bree. But anyway, so he knows how he's going to come across. So I do agree that if he were just to come in earnest and totally straight up from the beginning, right? Hi. So I'm, I just want to help. I'm totally on your side, and you should come with me because I can help you. They're going to be untrusting, right? So by kind of playing up to their fears, and then explaining himself as he goes, he does accomplish both things, right? The thing we've been mostly focusing on is his own side of things, right? He doesn't want to reveal too much about himself, and he's very coy about revealing anything about what he knows or about who he is, right? So that's the other reason, of course, why he doesn't want to be forthcoming. But in addition, I do think, John, that you've got a really good point, that he's trying to kind of bring the hobbits along a little bit more gently, and he's less likely to do that, perhaps, by simply trying to allay their fears from the beginning, right? I know I look sketchy, but hey, I'm in disguise, right? Really, I'm a good guy, and I'm on your side, right? That's what rascals would say, right? So by instead of looking like a rascal who is not acting like a rascal and trying to get them to take him at his word completely, and oh no, really, no, honestly, you can trust me. He sort of plays up to their fears and allows them to see through it, right? And that's a more delicate game to play, and especially when you combine that with the fact that he's also trying to keep his own cards hidden, right? And not reveal too much about himself. When you add that in, it's a really tricky place for Strider to be in, for him to try to figure out how to approach the whole conversation with Frodo. Yeah. Yeah, good. Irindus summarizes by saying Strider forces them to face their fears about strangers and proves himself trustworthy. Valoria suggesting it's like reverse psychology that he's using there. Yeah, in a sense. Yeah, that's interesting. So John adds here, he says that litmus test is the term I should have used in that post. He says Strider forces Frodo to set the test, which Strider has to meet in order for Frodo to trust him. Without the rascalitude, Frodo would never have set any test. Right? He just would have rejected him. Right? But yes, by sort of challenging Frodo to challenge him, he enables himself to meet Frodo's tests. Right. And so kind of pushes Frodo to push at him rather than simply, freaking out and not, refusing to have anything to do with him. Mike says the best con is when you can convince your mark that the whole thing was their idea, right? And that's the tricky thing here, Mike, right? Is that it can always circle back to simple rascalitude, right? I mean, you could just, you can never... Or rather, let me say it the other way around. You can always say, like, well, it's that's just like a really cunning con man, right? And how they would act. But that's, of course, the whole point, right? They can't know. They're never going to know for sure, right? It's not like certainty is not a possibility. There will come a point when they have to simply choose. They have to decide. Are they going to believe him or are they not going to believe him? Because it's not going to be able to be proved exactly as you suggest, Mike. I mean, it's always there's always a better con artist out there, right? Yeah. Good. Okay. So let's carry on. Having thought about that, let's move back. So this is the slide we ended with last time, but I only did the first half, right? I only wanted to talk about that the first part, right? Strider's moving in the opposite direction from what Gildor did, right? When Gildor was like, if I tell you more about the Black Riders, you won't even move, right? And here's Strider saying, would it be better if you were more afraid, right? You're afraid, but you're not afraid enough. Sorry, I just realized my phone is not charging, and it really should be if I want Twitter to actually work for an entire class. That would be handy. Sorry, my charger is being dubious here. All right, I think I got it. Anyway, okay. So we had just gotten Strider can take you by paths that are seldom trodden. Will you have them? There was a heavy silence. Frodo made no answer. His mind was confused with doubt and fear. Sam frowned and looked at his master, and at last he broke out. With your leave, Mr. Frodo, I'd say no. This Strider here, he warns and he says take care, and I say yes to that. And let's begin with him. He comes out of the wild, and I never heard no good of such folk. He knows something, that's plain, and more than I like, but it's no reason why we should let him go leading us out into some dark place far from help, as he puts it, right? So, Mike, here Sam is exactly suggesting, what you were suggesting, right? You can't trust him, right? You can't be sure that you can trust him. The very thing, like the very advice that he's saying, oh, you should be careful whom you go with. It's like, that's what a clever con artist would say, right? So yeah, Sam is, and I get Hrothgar. Like, it's not that I think Sam is like, oh, like you can't put one over on Sam Gamgee, right? He's on to every con. His reaction, I think, is not sophisticated. It's sort of simple. right? Forthright, Marianne. That's a really good and I think an excellent word to use here, right? Sam says, "Look, simplest solution." Sam's kind of going all Occam's razor on this situation, right? He's like, "Look, okay, we've got reason to can we all agree, right? We have reason to doubt this guy, right? So why trust him?" Right? Why let him go lead us into some dark place far from help? I love how Sam throws Strider's own words back at him, right? Or sort of an approximation of them, right? Strider can take you by paths that are seldom trodden, right? And Sam takes that and turns that to some dark place far from help, right? Which is lovely, right? Because when Strider talks about it, it makes it sound like, I can lead you in places that nobody else knows, right? I am a uniquely qualified guide, right? And here Sam takes that same phrase, turns it around and says, yeah, he's uniquely qualified to lead us out where nobody else can hear us scream, and then who knows what's going to happen. So yeah, and Matt, that's a really good point. Matt points out that Sam, being the one who has most successfully conned Frodo in the past, knows all about how it's done. So notice what's the basis of Sam's thinking here, right? First, sort of general suspiciousness, right? Just general caution he has. He does not have, it is very clear. I mean, we talked about Frodo's kind of default setting to trust, right? And that we were seeing that how quickly he was shifting to trusting Strider at the beginning of this conversation, right? How little it took before he seemed to be at least making gestures of trust to Strider. Sam, on the other hand, does not have that default setting, right? He is suspicious by default. And the kind of suspicion that we are seeing here is, well, it's Gamgee-like, right? I mean, it's Gaffer-like. It's he comes out of the wild and I never heard no good of such folk, right? It's I see several people are talking about the wild and why wild is capitalized. The wild is a spot, and it is a spot. I think I read this, I think exactly the same as you do. Where it's mostly a spot is on maps, right? You've got the Shire, you've got the civilized world. Maybe Bree is on the map, right on the edge of the map, and then on the other side of that is just called the wild. Right. Now that terminology is incorporated from The Hobbit. The Hobbit uses that quite a lot. When Bilbo crosses over into the wild, it's really the Misty Mountains that are truly the borders of the wild, in The Hobbit anyway. That's why the Elrond's house is the last homely house before you get to the wild, right? Coming from the Shire, the Elrond's is the last stop in civilization before you enter the wild and the unknown. Dime, exactly. On the map in The Hobbit, the edge of the wild is clearly marked. It's just like, this is, at least to the people who make those maps, right? This is not exactly uncharted, but this is wilderness, right? This is untamed land, and we don't know what is going on here. Aragorn, it's kind of like the "Here There Be Dragons" thing. Of course, there literally is a "Here There Be Dragons" thing on the Hobbit map, right? Up in the north, right? On the Withered Heath. There's the wild. That's where there are giants, there are wolves, there are goblins, there are even like dudes who can turn into bears. There's giant spiders, there's elves, there's all kinds of things. They're not all bad, right? But it's all crazy, it's all wild, and it's none of it like the Shire. So So yeah, the wild is definitely a place. He comes out of the wild, and I never heard no good of such folk. And this is an interesting combination of things, right? On the one hand, this is like a kind of parochialism like we've seen from many of the Shire hobbits, right? I mean, if people in the Marish and Buckland are queer from a Hobbiton standpoint, what must the people who actually live out in the wild be? Right? Beyond strange, right? Beyond dubious, like downright dangerous. But then again, you have to remember there's another thing, right? And that is, I never heard no good of such folk, right? Well, where has he heard anything, right? This is not just like I've, no news of like charitable organizations founded by folks in the wild has ever been reported back in the Shire. Remember, Sam is a story listener, right? He loves stories. So here I think we can see a combination of the two things. One, the kind of parochialism that he inherits from his dad, and that kind of worldview, which seems to be common to many of the Shire hobbits, to all, really, to like the mainstream of Shire hobbits. But at the same time, Sam is part of this sort of subculture, which does listen to and is eager for stories from outside the Shire, legends and things, right? So I think that Sam is speaking in both cases, right? Sort of from both perspectives. He has heard things about folks that live out in the wild, and he's not heard much good of it, right? I wonder what stories Sam might have heard. I can think of some, right? Imagine the story, remember the story of Turin Turambar, right? Remember the outlaws that Turin Turambar led? Those were, folk that lived out in the wild, right? And they weren't very good, right? I mean, they kind of came around and kind of ended up on the side of the good guys, sort of, but they were not. They were outlaws. They were not pleasant fellows. So yeah, I mean, and I agree. And even at the end, they're hardly upstanding individuals. So there's all kinds of reasons why, both from traditional stories and from Sam's own sort of point of view as a Shire hobbit, why he would not really trust them. And yeah, Matt, there are big folk who have been giving the Bounders trouble recently as well. Absolutely. Even from the Bree perspective, right? They're clearly dubious of, not just of Rangers. I don't just mean like Strider's own personal rep, but there's ruffians about, right? They haven't yet had the problem with ruffians that they're going to have, as we know. But still, people who live out in the wild and sometimes come down and, rob honest folks on the, or raid farms or whatever. I mean, that's a thing that happens. We know that they have categories for this in Bree, right? This is something that this is why they have a guard at the gate, right? So there's stories about these kinds of things. So Sam's suspicion it's not blind, it's not ignorant, right? There's some decent grounding to it, and the way he kind of cuts through this complicated situation by saying, you know what, essentially like better safe than sorry. And I do agree, somebody was talking about this earlier on. Irindus, I really like that observation that Sam's Edge of the Wild might be closer to the Shire than the Mapmaker's Edge of the Wild. Yeah, certainly that seems very likely. But I forget who was it who was talking about this. But the next one, he knows something that's plain and more than I like, right? But it's no reason why we should let him go leading us out. Remember, because he's absolutely right? What cause do they have to trust Strider, right? What has he given them, really, as a token of why he should be trusted? And the only thing he's done is reveal that he knows stuff, right? That he knows Frodo's real name, that he knows that they're fleeing the Shire, that he was waiting for them to come, that he knows about the Black Riders who are hunting them, right? And Frodo seems to be sensitive to the whole, and we talked about this last time, that whole, like, we're on the same side kind of empathy thing that that seems to, that Strider seems to develop with Frodo when Strider mentions the Black Riders. Sam, not so moved by that, right? So he knows something. He knows who you are. He knows that we're coming. He knows who's hunting us, and he has hinted that he knows about the burden that you're carrying, right? He knows the secret of our journey. So far from being reason to trust him, Sam points out, this is reason to be more deeply suspicious. And the way that he twists that, it's no reason why we should let him go leading us out into some dark place far from help, right? That's the fact that he knows more than he should is not any reason for us to trust him. So Sam is right? So one of the things I think that's really fascinating here is to look at the difference between Frodo and Sam, right? And I don't, I think you know me well enough to know I don't mean any insult to Sam in this, but Frodo's response to Aragorn is different. He seems to be sort of responding to Aragorn on a different kind of level than Sam has. Sam is making good, this is Hobbit sense, right? Sam is showing excellent Hobbit sense in his response here. Look at Frodo's answer, because I think that we see what I'm talking about when I talk about responding on a different level. Pippin fidgeted and looked uncomfortable. Strider did not reply to Sam, but turned his keen eyes on Frodo. Frodo caught his glance and looked away. "No," he said slowly, "I don't agree. I think you are not really as you choose to look. You began to talk to me like the Bree folk, but your voice has changed. Still, Sam seems right in this. I don't see why you should warn us to take care, and yet ask us to take you on trust. Why the disguise? Who are you? What do you really know about my business? And how do you know it?" So, a couple things here, right? First, Frodo perceives something, right? "I don't agree," he says to Sam. Now notice he doesn't contradict Sam in the sense of like he doesn't disprove anything that Sam has. He doesn't rebut anything that Sam has said. Sam has uttered good Hobbit sense, and logic is behind him, right? It would be this like the smart play for them to follow Sam's line of reasoning. So what's Sam's response? Sam's response is, or Frodo's response is, no, there's something else going on here, right? I'm perceiving something beyond what we're seeing. And it's interesting here. On the one hand, this is sort of a simple observation, right? You began to talk to me like the Bree folk, but your voice has changed. And I believe that means, we've alluded to this a couple times previously, I believe that refers to his accent, that his voice has actually changed. So his accent and diction are different than they began. You began to talk to me like the Bree folk. I'm pretty sure that that's what Frodo means when he says that. So that's one interesting thing. And I, Jock, I didn't see your full name there on Twitter. I don't think that this is a slip on Strider's part. I think that this is one of the things, and it's not been commented on yet. We haven't really had, because Tolkien isn't representing the Bree dialect directly in the way he spells words or anything like that. So we don't really know what accent Breelanders have. But anyway, didn't we agree they would have Welsh accents? But anyway, so yet Lady might be like, I think he did just let it slip on purpose. I think that that's part of the sort of subtle game that he is playing. right? Thinking even back to John's observation, right? He is putting Frodo in a position to challenge him and sort of see through him. And so he gives him something to see through first. So he comes in and he's using the Bree accent. And then as it goes on, he drops the Bree accent. If I had to guess, by the way, if I had to guess where in the conversation Strider's accent changed, my guess would be when he says "excellent." When he responds favorably to Frodo's challenge. If I had to guess, that's where I would guess that he drops his accent or shifts his accent, and shows that he's not, in fact, sort of a native of the Bree lands. So on the one hand, we can see Frodo making some careful observations that maybe Sam hasn't made, right? But it's not just that, right? This is not just, I, Sam, have paid closer attention and I've totally Sherlocked this out in ways that you haven't figured out, right? That's not what's going on. He starts with, I think you're not really as you choose to look. I can perceive that there is more to you than appears on the surface. Again, part of it is I see evidence of disguise, right? Like your accent thing. But I think there's more to it than that. Marianne was suggesting, and I think a couple people on Discord were suggesting as well, that this could quite likely be one elf friend recognizing another. We know that happens. I was thinking about that with Strider turning his keen eyes on Frodo. The keen eyes thing, right? Is that a kind of a hint, right? As the eyes of one elf friend look into the eyes of another elf friend, is that remember Goldberry could tell instantly that Frodo was an elf friend, right? Frodo doesn't have the same experience, but is there something that he just kind of picks up on, right? That gives him the sense that there is something more, and the something more that there is a good thing, right? One could reply very much like Sam already did, right? And he's like, no, Sam, I don't agree. He's obviously hiding who he really is, and he's putting up a false front. That's why we should trust him, right? That doesn't make any sense. Unless, of course, that what you're pointing to is that what's beneath the surface is a good thing, right? That he can in somehow sense or feel that there's a good thing. And again, I come back to this sort of almost like apparently instinct for trust that Frodo seemed to have for Strider. Even the crawling over to his table in the common room, right? Why would he do that? I think, again, that we're seeing this kind of connection. He's been sort of drawn to Strider, right? Yeah. It is interesting, JJ. JJ says she's reminded a little bit of Dante, that, reason is good, but it can only get you so far. This is a theme we'll see a lot, right? Again, Sam's play is the sensible one, right? Logic dictates the smart thing to do here is show this guy the door, right? You can't be sure. How can you possibly be sure? Following this guy into a dark place far from help is a risk at the very least, right? And so smarter to minimize that risk and say, no, thank you, sketchy, weirdo, disguised dude. But Frodo doesn't want to do the smart thing, right? That's not what he's guided by, and we'll see that happen a lot, JJ, definitely. But he does press him. Frodo does press him, right? And John, of course, I'm thinking of your post here again, as Frodo presses him and is testing him more and more, right? I don't see why you should warn us to take care and yet ask us to take you on trust. Why the disguise? Who are you? What do you really know about my business? And somebody, and I missed again who it was. These comments keep getting washed upstream here. Somebody was saying that it's just like Bombadil? Who was saying that? Darn it, I missed it. That the question that he asks him is the same question he asked of Bombadil. Who are you? Right? And so let's remember that conversation, right? The both times that Frodo asked that question, once of Bombadil, once to Bombadil, who is he and who are you? The response was essentially that's kind of if not a meaningless question, an impossible one to answer, right? Who are you? Alone, yourself, and nameless. I'm Tom Bombadil. That's the only answer, he says. I have identified myself. How can I do more? How can you know me, who I am? How can you sort of interact with like the true essence of me in some way that's going to satisfy you to answer that question, right? I can tell you who I am. I can tell you about myself. I can tell you about the color of my clothing. What else do you need to know, right? What does a good answer to that question look like as far as you're concerned, right? That's the way that question gets challenged by Tom Bombadil. Here, we see it in a different context, right? And yet, we see, in fact, the same kind of dilemma, right? Who are you? How is he supposed to answer that, right? He is alone himself and nameless. Strider is, right? He is nameless because he chooses to hide his real name. He is alone, right? Who is he? Alone, himself, and nameless. And again, so it points to the dilemma. Why the disguise? But he's disguising himself, right? So why could you trust him? If he answers the question, who are you? And he's like, oh, okay, my name is Aragorn. Well, why should they believe that, right? Again, this is the dilemma of there's no such thing as proof. They're going to have to just decide what they believe or don't believe. Just as there's no answer from Tom Bombadil to the question, who are you? That's not a question that really has a satisfactory, and that can be answered, at least not in words, right? Notice what Tom kind of does instead is answer it in song and help them to experience him and his history and who he is. That's kind of his answer to the question, right? Aragorn, and remember, by the way, remember that Tom Bombadil has already preemptively answered this question? Who is he, right? Who is this person? Well, remember that vision that Tom Bombadil gave them of the succession of kings, and the last one came with a star on his brow? Yeah, that's who he is, right? So Tom Bombadil's already answered this question again with his magic, with his song. But anyway, so that's kind of a fun little point. But of course, Frodo doesn't really know that that's the case here. And of course we have the fact that Frodo himself is concealing his name as well, right? So we've got all kinds of issues here, but at the end of the day, we're left with this dilemma, right? You warn us to take care, yet you ask us to take you on trust. Yeah, of course. Right, those are the only two things. Strider must do both of those things. Finn, you're right. Tom Bombadil's kind of playing the long game there, right? The hobbits are not going to understand. They're not going to be in a position to understand that vision from Tom Bombadil until like the end of the Return of the King. Absolutely. And so, Simon is asking, did Bombadil know or expect that they would meet Aragorn? He seems to know Gandalf, but you don't remember any indication he'd interacted with Aragorn. Well, Aragorn knows who he is, right? So there's at least a hint. And even, the way that he refers to him as Old Bombadil, right, suggests at least he seems to want to convey the fact that he's familiar with Tom Bombadil. I don't see any reason to think he wouldn't be necessarily. Strider's been wandering this region for a long time. Why wouldn't he pop in to say hi, to introduce himself to Tom Bombadil? So I don't see any reason to think that they don't know each other. And of course, Simon, you're absolutely right. Tom Bombadil is genuinely very old, right? So that could be merely a description. But anyway, I still think it's quite likely that Aragorn met Tom Bombadil and that he knows him. We also talked about Catriona is saying, and we were discussing this when we were looking at the eavesdropping, or rather Strider's reporting of the eavesdropping scene last time, that the possibility anyway that Tom Bombadil knew that Aragorn was there in the bushes, right? So yeah, it seems possible or likely that he knew or anticipated somehow that Tom Bombadil was, or that they would meet Aragorn. That seems to me likely, actually, but of course it's not exactly something we can prove. Anyway, so the two take-homes I would point to from Frodo's speech here. First, this sense that he has of connection, right? There's something below the surface here, and it's good, right? It doesn't lead me to, the fact that I know that he's hiding who he really is doesn't automatically lead me to distrust him, right? I don't agree that we should just reject him because it's the smart thing to do. But the second thing is the fact of their dilemma, right? Why should we take you on trust? Why should we be more careful and also take you on trust? And his questions are good questions. Why are you disguised? Who are you? What do you really know about my business? He's hinted, right? But he's not given anything away. And so here is a very direct challenge. And so, John, I'm coming back to your testing theory, right? The putting Frodo in a position where he gives Strider tests that Strider can pass. He now finally has come very directly to the point, right? Give me your real name. Tell me what your purpose is. Tell me what you know exactly. Don't just give hints like a con artist would, right? Of course, like a con artist might guess that I was here for some purpose and make some, dark allusions to it, hoping that I would betray something which he could then play off of, right? No, you tell me everything that you know about my business, right? So that I can know whether or not I can trust you. Strider continues. Strider responds, "The lesson in caution has been well learned," said Strider with a grim smile. "But caution is one thing and wavering is another. You will never get to Rivendell now on your own, and to trust me is your only chance. You must make up your mind. I will answer some of your questions if that will help you to do so. But why should you believe my story if you do not trust me already? Still, here it is." Okay, so again, John, coming back to the observations you were making in your post there, notice he's doing it again, right? He's doing it again because, so he prompts Frodo to make the challenge, right? And he's prepared to respond to it. So he is about to give the answers to Frodo's questions, right? He's about to tell him his name, right? To tell him what he knows, to explain why the disguise, right? But of course, he points out this isn't going to prove anything, right? Why should you believe anything that I tell you about myself if you don't already trust me? You can't trust me just because I tell you stuff. So anyway, yeah. But notice he does do one thing, right? Even just in his little preamble to the answers he's about to give, right? You will never get to Rivendell now on your own. They didn't mention that Rivendell was their destination, right? So by saying that, he has shown some again, that's another little thing to hold on to, right? Again, it's not proof. Again, a really good con artist might guess, especially if he knew that the connection with Bilbo and anything about Bilbo's history, right? A well-informed con artist might be able to work that out. A con artist who had read The Hobbit, for instance. Yeah, well, see, JJ, I don't think it's that simple, though. Where else would hobbits leaving the Shire and passing through Bree Head? I agree, there isn't anything other than Rivendell off to the east of there, but there isn't anything. Remember, Rivendell is a secret valley. People don't, there aren't signposts to it. And I can't imagine, I mean, other than Bilbo, there are no Shire hobbits who are heading out past Bree on the way to Rivendell, right? That has never happened. Bilbo is literally the only hobbit that Elrond has met in his millennia of existence, he says, or at least the only one he's gotten to know. And I don't see any reason to think that any other hobbit's ever been to Rivendell. So yeah. So no, I don't think that there's. It's not like it's the logical destination, but again, all you'd have to do is know something about Bilbo, right, or know Bilbo's story, then you might be able to make a guess at it. But so again, it's not proof, but it does give them another thing to hold on to, right? Another little piece to another little piece of flotsam in the water for them to grasp onto and think, to have some objective point in the midst of the this sort of doubt, right? Yeah. So yeah, exactly, Simon. Gandalf gets lost looking for the path down into Rivendell in The Hobbit. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, Matt, I wonder about the Took who took a fairy bride. But of course, that's absurd, right? That totally didn't happen, right? Well, I don't know. And maybe she wasn't from Rivendell anyway. Maybe she was from the Fallas. Who knows, right? Maybe she's out from, not the Fallas, but out from the Havens, out by Círdan. Who knows? Yeah. Anyway, okay. I love how Strider draws attention to the interpretive dilemma that they're in, right? I mean, he openly acknowledges this. You can't know for sure that you can trust me, right? But I will tell you anyway. And this is also, I think, important because this moment, that is important because he seems to be genuinely shifting his own tack here. That is, abandoning his own caution. Strider himself, again, shifting back as we've been doing to thinking about this conversation from Strider's point of view. It's interesting that Strider has chosen this moment to throw his own caution to the wind. Notice how he's taking his own advice, right? He says, caution is one thing and wavering is another. That always struck me as a little bit of a harsh thing for him to say. I mean, like, come on, man. Like, to accuse them just of wavering at this point, like, they've got good cause to be doubting, right? Good cause to be uncertain about stuff. You don't have to be all harsh with them and accuse them of just cowardice because they're uncertain. Of course they are. But again, I think I don't think he means that pejoratively. I don't think he's insulting them. He's just pointing out, like, you can waver in uncertainty indefinitely, right? If what you're looking for is certainty before you move, you're never going to get it, right? Caution is good, but you can't let yourself just waver, right? You've got to be ready to be cautious in your decision, but be ready to make a decision. And of course, what does he do? Immediately, he makes a decision. He stops wavering as well. He commits himself, or at least he's prepared to commit himself and give the answers to the questions, which he has not wanted to give before. We've seen him be evasive to this point in the conversation about revealing anything about himself. He is now going to commit himself to that. And that seems quite fair. And I agree. Simon and John, yes, Frodo is wavering. Yes, I get it. I'm just saying it seems a little harsh to, diss him for it, right? He's got good cause for wavering here. But again, that's the point. There will always be good cause for wavering, right? It's not, he's not accusing him of a character flaw. He's saying you've just gotta run with it. Exactly. The only bad decision is indecision. This is actually really interesting in that regard too, right? Decision making. Aragorn and decision making is actually a really interesting study. Aragorn is one of my favorite decision makers in Tolkien. You know, one of the people that we see like deliberate and choose a course of action. That's why one of the reasons why Aragorn is a really interesting study for like, you know, as like a leadership model and stuff. He's really kind of interesting to look at in that way. And we see this is something that he's on top of from the very beginning, right? This is one of the first things that he points out, like don't wait for certainty, right? Even if you're not sure, do something, right? Be cautious, right? Don't be reckless, but caution is one thing and wavering is another. It's a really great, in context, really great piece of advice. Okay. At that moment, there came a knock at the door. Mr. Butterbur had arrived with candles, and behind him was Nob, with cans of hot water. Strider withdrew into a dark corner. "I've come to bid you good night," said the landlord, putting the candles on the table. "Nob, take the water to the rooms." He came in and shut the door. "It's like this," he began, hesitating and looking troubled. "If I've done any harm, I'm sorry indeed, but one thing drives out another, as you'll admit, and I'm a busy man. But first one thing and then another this week have jogged my memory, as the saying goes, and not too late, I hope. You see, I was asked to look out for hobbits of the Shire, and for one by the name of Baggins in particular." First of all, how awesome is that as an introduction? Right? What a way to approach his topic. You kind of get the general feeling that Butterbur thinks he's being tactful here, right? Like he's sort of gently coming around to the point, but he could not possibly have made the beginning of this conversation sound any worse than by the right. I mean, if there's one thing that Frodo is keyed up about and wary of, it's people who are waiting for a party of hobbits coming from the Shire, and one by the name of Baggins in particular, right? That's exactly what spies of the enemy and people who've been bribed by Black Riders would say, right? So, that the fat face of Butterbur sure sounds at first like it is concealing dark designs. Strider's finesse Butterbur hath not, says Lincoln. Yeah, or at least he's really kind of put his foot in it here, right? And what has that got to do with me? Asked Frodo. "Ah, you know best," said the landlord knowingly. "I won't give you away, but I was told that this Baggins would be going by the name of Underhill, and I was given a description that fits you well enough, if I may say so." Okay, so notice Butterbur, not as cunningly as Strider, is nevertheless sort of showing through what he knows that he is to be trusted, right? He's making kind of the same move, right? I'm in the know, right? I'm part of this conspiracy. I'm part of the secret, right? I'm not an enemy to it. I'm not a discoverer of it. That he was told that the Baggins would be going by the name of Underhill suddenly shifts things around, right? Now it's not the Black Riders. The Black Riders are not going to be saying that, or at least not at first. They wouldn't be saying that, right? And JJ, I agree. And what has that got to do with me? Might be the most subtle thing that Frodo has said. Like, that might be his most successful moment of keeping a low profile and remembering that he's on the lam, right? He's not covered himself with glory on that front to this point, but that's tolerably well handled right there, right? Yeah, JJ, exactly. Unlike when Strider uses, calls him Mr. Baggins, right, in The Prancing Pony, and he just tries to, like, ignore it and pass it off. But yeah, so that what has that got to do with me, is good. But then again, Butterbur's reaction is that knowing look, right? Like, right? Secret between you and me. Don't worry, right? I'm not going to give you away. And I was given a description. So both of those two things are immediately encouraging signs, right? The Black Riders don't know about the Underhill disguise, and the Black Riders don't know what he looks like. They're not going to give a description. Apart from the fact that they don't exactly see, they haven't really seen him anyway. Yeah. And Matt, I agree. Doesn't it begin to feel like his secret mission is not only like that secret is not only the most incompetently protected, but like the most widely exposed secret. Who didn't, he doesn't know what's really going on. Like, I won't give you away, says Butterbur. Like, from whom are you keeping the secret at this point? Yeah. From Bob, says Finn. Right. There might be one person still in the dark. Possibly. Yeah, let's keep going. But notice, I'm just referring to my subtitle. I said starting on a different footing, right? So when you compare and contrast this interview to the beginning of the interview with Strider, right? Notice how Strider immediately puts them on the defensive by having sneaked in and just be sitting there casually in a chair with his legs crossed, right? Without them even noticing that he entered the room. So the way that he puts them on the defensive immediately, and the way that he characterizes himself as A, competent, but B, sketchy and sneaky, right? Really sets the tone for their conversation. Here, Butterbur, comes in forthrightly and is immediately hesitating, troubled, and apologetic, right? And making excuses for himself. Whereas Strider's kind of challenging Frodo, Butterbur's approach is a very marked contrast. Indeed, let's have it then, the description, of course, said Frodo, unwisely interrupting. A stout little fellow with red cheeks, said Mr. Butterbur solemnly. Pippin chuckled, but Sam looked indignant. That won't help you much. It goes for most hobbits, Barley, he says to me, continued Mr. Butterbur with a glance at Pippin. I love that. It applies to you too, mate. But this one is taller than some and fairer than most, and he has a cleft in his chin. Perky chap with a bright eye. Begging your pardon, but he said it, not me. Notice the bright eye. I can't help but notice the bright eye. The elf friend thing, right? I don't think Butterbur's an elf friend, right? I can't absolutely rule it out, right? It's conceivable. But I don't think so, right? And yet I think it is the sort of the sparkle of the sort of the elf friendship in Frodo's eye, that that's the kind of thing that we're told is one of the marks of an elf friend, right? So it's kind of interesting that that's mentioned here. And then, but you're right there, Mike, though. Frodo wasn't an elf friend when last Gandalf saw him. Right, that's true. That's true. But that doesn't change my observation, though, right? It doesn't change the fact, that is to say, that a bright eye seems to be one of the trends, one of the marks, right, of an elf friend. It just makes Gandalf's perception of him sort of more interesting, right? JJ points out that both Frodo and Butterbur are wizard friends, though. Yes, it's true, though I'm not sure that leaves the same mark on you that being an elf friend does. Yeah. And yeah, that's a really great observation here. The narrator's perspective. So let's talk about this comment. The narrator's commentary, unwisely interrupting, right? The narrator's commentary on Frodo's remark here, right? And someone was asking just a minute ago. John was, in what sense is his interruption unwise, right? I think it's unwise because unwise in the sense of sort of daring him to give the description, right? Which immediately comes out and is not very flattering. But I'm sorry, but I'm thinking about the interrupting part of it. Hang on, let me come back to that to a second. Ambrosius Aurelianus asks, does fairer mean simply more handsome, or that he is more obviously honest, kind sort of fellow? It could be neither, Arthur. It could be something much simpler. That his hair is a lighter color. Fair usually means blonde. It's hard because fair also means beautiful or handsome, right? It means attractive. But like if you're reading Dracula, right, and you hear about the 3 vampire women and it says 2 were dark and 1 was fair, it just means that 2 of them were brunettes and the 3rd was a blonde. So that's when used, especially when used in a description, a physical description like this, it probably just means that his hair is lighter color. Because I'll remember hobbits all have brown hair. That's sort of standard. So I think that Frodo seems to have lighter color hair than most of them do. That would seem the simplest interpretation of that. But that's not to say that the other senses might not be true. It also might be that he is taller than some and more attractive than most. Might also be a perfectly adequate reading of that, right? But those two complements seem to go together. Yeah, and I agree, John. Golden hair is rare in hobbits, but not unheard of. Remember, blondness is there's a rash of that in 1420, right? After the Scouring of the Shire. Sam's daughter, Eleanor. But yeah, so but anyway, going back to the question of the interruption, by characterizing, I need to think about that because it doesn't exactly sound like Frodo is interrupting him. That is, Butterbur seems to be at a pause there. So when I'm thinking about the unwisely interrupting comment, I'm trying to think, if he's interrupting Butterbur, what was Butterbur about to say, right? How would he have continued if Frodo hadn't said anything, right? Would he have just carried on with the description? If so, in what sense was his interruption unwise, right? Because he didn't really affect him in any way. So I've got to think that his intervention did divert Butterbur out of his original course. But then where was his original course going? I'm not sure I'm understanding. I'm not sure I'm seeing the flow of the conversation there. I don't know, Frumius. Fromia says it looks as if Frodo was asking about where Butterbur was going with this, but instead got the description of Frodo. I think he's asking for the description. Indeed, let's have it then. So he did describe me. Let's have it then. So he tries to challenge Butterbur. Thinking that Butterbur is so. Indeed, let's have it then. Sounds doubtful. Right? Oh, so you're giving a description of me. Okay, well, let's hear this description that you've been given, right? If you were really given a description, then you won't mind reciting it for me, will you? Right? And that challenge seems to have been unwise in the sense that Butterbur is in fact able to give it to him right off, right? And he starts quoting it right away. So I think in that sense it's unwise, that it was unwise to challenge Butterbur's flow, right? And so he pays for it by being proven wrong, right? Hey, John, look, it's exactly like what was happening with Strider, except kind of working in a different way, right? Yeah. And JJ, that's always been the way I've primarily thought of it. That it ends up with everyone hearing a description of him that is in some places unflattering, is how I always understood the unwisely interrupting bit. Yeah. Okay. Taller than some and fairer than most, and has a cleft in his chin, a perky chap with a bright eye. Begging your pardon, but he said it, not me. I love how Butterbur draws attention to the fact that I was quoting there, right? Those are his words, not mine. He said it, and who was he? Asked Frodo eagerly. Ah, that was Gandalf, if you know who I mean. A wizard, they say he is, but he's a good friend of mine, whether or no. But now I don't know what he'll have to say to me if I see him again. Turn all my ale sour or me into a block of wood, I shouldn't wonder. He's a bit hasty. Still, what's done can't be undone. This is one of my, I love this Butterbur character moment, right? Remember, we've gotten a glimpse of we've gotten a glimpse of the Breeland reaction to magicians, right? My friend the wizard, that's no recommendation, clearly, in Breetown, right? Yeah. Karita, I wonder, that might be so. Thinking about the unwisdom of the introduction. And Catriona, I think, was thinking a similar thing, too, as I think was Marianne as well, that it's unwise to interrupt him because he might never get back on track if you do, right? So if you're taking a real risk, right? If you interrupt Butterbur and divert him into a different channel, you might never get the information that you were wanting, right? He might never get around to the end of the sentence that he was beginning. Anyway, a wizard, they say he is, but he's a good friend of mine, whether or no. I love how Butterbur goes to bat for Gandalf here, right? He is not ashamed of his friend Gandalf, right? They say that Gandalf is a wizard, right? A wizard, they say he is. Notice he doesn't, Butterbur can neither confirm nor deny the wizard status of Gandalf, right? But he's a good friend of mine, but he doesn't care. He's a good friend of mine, whether or no, right? He vouches for Gandalf. And that's really cool, right? It is, was it Jackie? I think it's Jackie. It is, or Jacques. I can't. Sorry, I still can't tell which from the little Twitter line there. It does seem as if wizards are kind of too dangerous to be friends with, right? Jackie. Okay, right. I thought so. Yeah. But again, he stands up for it, right? He doesn't back down. He is a good friend of mine. Whether he's a wizard or not, I don't care. Whether he is a wizard or not, he's my friend, and I'm sticking up with him. Yeah. So that's really cool. Yeah. Sorry, I'm thinking about Finn, about your comment there. Finn was just talking about how wanting to think about Frodo as the narrator writing this story. I'm not sure. I'm not sure that in unwisely interrupting, we're hearing Frodo, the later story writer's voice, necessarily there. Possibly. But it's complicated. Yeah, Matt, I agree with you. We do get a glimpse, don't we, of Gandalf's life, right? There's not a lot of places where Gandalf is welcome, right? He's a disturber of the peace in the Shire. He's Stormcrow in Rohan. People. He's not really welcome there. He's of course, Matt. He's also not in very good odor with the Steward of Gondor either, right? Denethor is very happy to see the back of him, and he's disreputable even in Bree. Absolutely. Yeah. No, exactly. Denethor is not a fan. So yeah, no, this is Gandalf has isolated friends, right? But we see that, right? Everywhere we see that. We see he's got Bilbo and Frodo in the Shire. He's got Butterbur in Bree. He's got Faramir in Gondor. He's got Shadowfax in Rohan, right? So everywhere he's got like a friend at least. But he's Elrond, of course, yes, and Galadriel as well. But they're kind of different, right? Yeah. Yeah, that's interesting. Well, does he have Éomer in Rohan? I mean, he does eventually, but I'm not sure that Éomer is like Gandalf's guy. Not in the way that Faramir is Gandalf's guy, right? Faramir considers Gandalf like a mentor, right? Éomer certainly doesn't have that kind of relationship with him. Éomer's affiliation with Gandalf seems primarily premised upon the fact that Gandalf is opposing and getting rid of Wormtongue, and Éomer is a fan of that, right? Yeah, was he closer to Éamund, conceivably? But yeah. See, Jackie, I'm not sure he would have had the chance to be close to Gandalf, really. Maybe, but I don't think he spent much time in Rohan. I think when he gets to Rohan, after he escapes from Orthanc, it's the first time he's been there in a while. Gwaihir, yeah, it's true. Gwaihir is another bud of his. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, so Catriona, at first I definitely think that Éomer is more of an enemy of my enemy thing. Right? I mean, he's but like of course, when Gandalf heals Theoden, Éomer's totally with him, right? But yeah, I don't get the impression that Éomer begins in a genuinely pro Gandalf camp, right? He's more open-minded, I think. But again, there, I think that it's mostly him being anti-Wormtongue. My suspicion is that Éomer is cautiously non-insulting about Gandalf, right, when he's telling Aragorn the story. He's at the very least non-committal. He does not say that he believes the bad things that are being said about Gandalf, right? But why doesn't he believe them? Because they're coming from Wormtongue, right? And he doesn't believe and he's anti-Wormtongue. So the fact that Wormtongue and his followers are set against Gandalf seems to be the thing that mostly speaks in Gandalf's favor from Éomer's perspective. But anyway, okay. Okay. Oh, yeah, so several of you were wondering if he's a bit hasty line, if we're supposed to be thinking of the Ents. Well, no, I don't think we're supposed to be thinking of the Ents yet. I mean, when Tolkien wrote this, the Ents were nowhere in his mind yet. Ents totally didn't even exist. But, of course, it is fun that Butterbur uses the same word, and hilarious, right? Certainly as conversationalists, Butterbur and Treebeard don't have very much in common, right? So the idea that, like, the one thing that Butterbur and Treebeard have in common is that they both consider Gandalf hasty is kind of interesting, right? But actually, when you think about it, although their conversational style is very different, they're not totally unlike. That would be a fun paper, wouldn't it? Butterbur and Treebeard. See, Tom Bombadil and Treebeard, that's kind of low-hanging fruit, right? That's easy. Butterbur and Treebeard. Not on anybody's side, because no one is entirely on their side, right? But both of them friends to Gandalf. Both of them sort of presiding over this one place where Butterbur hasn't personally lived there for millennia, but the Brelanders have, right? And he is like the most representative and positive Breelander that we get. There are some similarities there, actually. And of course, one reason why Gandalf looks hasty to both of them, I would think, is that, to quote Butterbur out of context, that is, quote him when he's talking about Strider, he goes about at a great rate, right? Gandalf doesn't live anywhere, and he's always going hither and there. Yeah. So Jackie's asking, Butterbur's family has run the inn for how long? Answer: time out of mind, right? Nobody knows. But anyway, so so both of them are stable. Right, in this geographically stable, they stay in the same place. The fact that Gandalf has no home, the fact that he's Mithrandir, that he's the Grey Pilgrim, right, the Grey Wanderer, suggests that that seems hasty to them. Yes, they are rooted exactly, in one dear place. Yeah, good job, Matt, working a little Yeats quote there. Right. In a way that Gandalf is not. Yeah, Gandalf is very alien to them in that way, and I think to both of them in a similar way. Yeah. By the way, I would totally... I would love to... when in the Film project... when we get to Eriador, when we get to the Third Age, I totally want to have the Prancing Pony there from, like, centuries and millennia before, and have somebody who looks just cast the same actor as Butterbur and have him always be like, his name can be different, right? But to have there always be like a Butterbur in charge of the inn at Bree, I would totally do that. Like, anytime anyone is traveling, they always stop at the Prancing Pony, and there is like Mr. Butterbur. He's a different Mr. Butterbur every time, but they're all played by the same actor, maybe with different like facial hair or whatever. That's That's totally. I would love to depict Butterbur as like the symbol of, the stability of the Bree lands, right? That'd be fun. Yeah. Yeah, and Tilly and I agree. Gandalf does inspire a certain amount of fear in Butterbur. He's intimidated, right? He'll turn all my ale sour or me into a block of wood. Doesn't that kind of sound like the reason why most people aren't friends with wizards, right? Because they might do something like that. You never can tell about wizards, right? You never can tell with wizards, as Winnie the Pooh might say. Yeah, I mean, they like, they're unpredictable, right? Hasty, but also like powerful. They can do stuff, and they might do stuff, right? So yeah, it makes his assertion of friendship just a couple sentences before the more significant, right? He knows. He's under no illusions, right? He knows that Gandalf can do these things. He's afraid that Gandalf is going to do these things, but he still considers Gandalf his friend. Yeah, good. "Well, what have you done?" said Frodo, getting impatient with the slow unraveling of Butterbur's thoughts. Huh? See? Just like Treebeard? Huh? Right? So he talks faster than Treebeard and more, but still his thought is slow to unravel, right? Because he's got time, right? Where's he going? He's not going anywhere, right? Just like Treebeard. Oh man, I'm loving this comparison. Anyway, okay. "Where was I?" said the landlord, pausing and snapping his fingers. "Ah, yes, old Gandalf. 3 months back, he walked right into my room without a knock. 'Barley,' he says, 'I'm off in the morning. Will you do something for me?' 'You've only to name it,' I said. 'I'm in a hurry,' said he, 'and I've no time myself, but I want a message took to the Shire. Have you anyone you can send and trust to go?' 'I can find someone,' I said, 'tomorrow, maybe, or the day after.' 'Make it tomorrow,' he says, and then he gave me a letter." "It's addressed plain enough," said Butterbur, producing a letter from his pocket and reading out the address slowly and proudly. He valued his reputation as a lettered man. "Mr. Frodo Baggins, Bag End, Hobbiton, in the Shire." And yeah, so first, Hrothgar, yes, the "where was I" does suggest the unwisdom of interrupting him, right? Frodo is impatient with the slow unraveling of Butterbur's thoughts, and the consequence of his impatient interjection is to divert Butterbur's flow of thought, right? The more we see, the more I am convinced that that's what was unwise, right, about it in the first time. Yeah, and it is ironic, right, Finn, how he says to Gandalf, he reports that he says to Gandalf, "You've only to name it, and I'll do it," right? Except he doesn't do it. And as you can see by my subtitle, which I said, "Trusty and Willing," you'll remember, "Bring those that are trusty and willing," right? It was the advice. Take those as is willing, and take those that you can trust, right? Gandalf said, "Take those that you can trust." Gildor said, "Take those that are willing." Butterbur is clearly willing, right, to help Gandalf, but he's not very trusty, really. Yeah. Yeah. Oh, interesting. Oakwig, look at that. Oh, Oakwig points out that both Butterbur and Treebeard also both fail in Gandalf's appointed tasks. That's brilliant. Oh, see, I'm telling you, Treebeard and Butterbur. This is a paper that needs to be written. Anyway, okay. That's very good. So yeah, so he's not trusty, right? Extremely willing, but not very trusty. And I also love how Gandalf calls him Barley, right? What a great, first of all, just like what a great nickname for, I mean, I know people in Bree call him that anyway, but what a wonderful nickname for a guy who makes beer, right? Just to say. But anyway, Yeah, Tillian says this whole thing seems to be about people failing their way to victory, right? Yeah. So Tillian, yeah, I think you're right. We finally found someone who is worse at his job than Frodo is at his job, right? Bartleman is even worse as a letter deliverer, right? He's a worse mailman than Frodo is a fugitive. He's worse at being a delivery man than Frodo is at being a fugitive. And yet it does all work out, doesn't it? I'm in a hurry and I've no time myself, but I want a message took to the Shire. That's clearly not what Gandalf said, right? Gandalf would not say, I want a message took to the Shire. Bartleman, is clearly not quoting Gandalf word for word, right? JJ says, why was Butterbur chosen for this task? You can be sure that it was not for any merit that others did not possess. Yeah, exactly. Well, Valori, it's interesting. Valori mentions his literacy. But, that's interesting to me. Because from one way of looking at it, a literate person would actually be the last person that you would want to be to give a letter to, arguably, right? What safer messenger to send with a secret letter than someone who can't read it, right? There's a definite upside to that, especially if he is able to commit to memory things like the description, right, and everything. He'd remember the address, and writing it out on the letter. Gandalf's writing it out on the letter isn't gonna help. Butterbur is literate, but he wasn't even going to deliver it himself. The person that Butterbur was going to tell, was he literate? Odds are not, right? Foo-foo. Okay. Yeah, so Foo-foo, I agree with you. It would have been better perhaps if he'd given the letter to Nob or Bob. But Catriona, I do think that we see Gandalf does trust him, right? But again, it's like the conspirators said to Frodo, right? Remember when Frodo says in A Conspiracy Unmasked, it doesn't seem like I can trust anyone, right? And Merry says, it depends on what you want, right? You can trust us to stick with you through thick and thin, but you can't trust us to leave you to face things alone, right? To face danger alone. You can trust Butterbur not to betray you, right? Gandalf can trust. Butterbur is not going to give away a secret. He's not gonna read the letter. He's not gonna tell others about the letter. He's not gonna. You can't trust him in the other sense, right? You can't trust that he's actually going to remember to do what he was told to do. Yeah. Okay. I can find someone, I said, tomorrow maybe, or the day after. Make it tomorrow, he says, and then he gave me a letter. I like Butterbur's honesty here, that he's not trying to conceal how much he screwed this up, right? That is to say, like, he even relates how Gandalf emphasized that it really needs to be sent right away. Don't put it off. It also shows that Gandalf knows Butterbur, right? Don't put it off till the day after tomorrow. I know what that means, right? It's addressed plain enough. It is interesting that Butterbur values his reputation as a lettered man, right? Does this suggest a difference between Bree culture and Shire culture? Maybe. Maybe it just tells us something about Butterbur. Yeah. Yeah. I'm not really sure what that suggests. Yeah, and I agree, Matt. He's more absent-minded than forgetful, and we've already seen him quote the description, right? Brie memories tend to be retentive, and I don't think that Butterbur is any difference there. So he remembers stuff. He just can't always recall things, right? One thing drives out another. That's different from being forgetful. I speak as one who knows about this kind of thing, right? Although I may admire Sam, I am probably more like Butterbur than any other character in the Lord of the Rings. As much as my own self-image might be different. If there's one character that I solidly resemble in the Lord of the Rings, it would be Butterbur, I think. Yeah, but yeah. Mine like a lumber room. Absolutely. Thing wanted, always buried. That is absolutely me. Yeah. You're right, Fit. Thank you. I can see through a brick wall in time. You got to give me enough time, but eventually I'll see through the brick wall. Yeah. Lilireth, I wonder if his literacy is a mark of his importance in town. It certainly is correlated with his being a business owner, right? I mean, he keeps the books and stuff at the Prancing Pony. He presumably deals with paperwork and makes notes and records things in ledgers and stuff like that. But otherwise, you don't really have to be a lettered man, even to be an innkeeper, really. And it's not obvious that being literate would give you status, necessarily. Again, think of Gaffer Gamgee's comment, right? Meaning no harm, right? And I trust no harm will come of it. Yeah, I think that he's... if there's that same attitude that Gaffer Gamgee gives us, right? If that same attitude is relevant in Bree, then he's liable to earn people's distrust for being literate more than earning their admiration. Because see, again, this is something that I often find this as a medievalist too, in kind of like teaching medieval literature in a modern classroom, with modern readers. One of the things that I find it really hard for modern people to imaginatively put themselves in is a world where illiteracy is not a bad thing, right? Or where literacy is not a goal. We're so used to literacy being one of the things that, like, one of those fundamental divisions of the haves from the have-nots, right? Like, if you are illiterate, you're so deeply disadvantaged in our society in so many ways. There's so many ways in which it's very, very difficult for you to function, and certainly even harder for you to get ahead, for you to thrive in our society, right? So we have this really rigid sense of literacy good, illiteracy very bad, right? And that's totally not true in an oral culture, right? That's our view on that, is a very print culture oriented viewpoint, right? Because we live in a print culture, we think that way. In a pre-print culture, which was either a handwritten or an oral culture, and those two things often, sort of went together, illiteracy is no negative thing. There's no stigma attached to that, which means there isn't a default virtue or glory attached to literacy either. I mean, it was a specialist skill. It's not like people didn't see it as useful. But it was useful. I mean, you know, being a miller was useful too. It doesn't mean everybody does it, right? Or that it's any particular virtue to be a miller, or a blacksmith or something like that. Or does it make you any better than anybody else just because you have that skill set? Yeah, sure, it's important. Good to have somebody in the town who has it, right? But, you know, it's not like everybody needs to be a blacksmith or a miller or whatever. Yeah, it's just, it's just a different world, a very different world than our modern world. Yeah. Yeah. Oh, absolutely, Lincoln. Socrates was distrustful and critical of literacy, and for a very good reason, right? Writing things down means. Awesome. Cedar Lord just joined. I just mentioned blacksmiths, and one of the greatest weaponsmiths I know just joined us live. That's really funny. Great to hear from you. But anyway, yeah. Lincoln, you're absolutely right. Literacy, one of the knocks against literacy is that it makes your memory bad, right? Just like having a cell phone which has your contacts all in it has made you, like, how many of your friends' cell phone numbers do you really know? Come on. Like, could you actually call somebody from somebody else's phone? No, you've forgotten everybody's phone number except maybe one or two. Right? Do you even know your own phone number? Maybe you do, right? But I mean, everybody forgets that now. If you have an aid to memory for that, you forget, right? Now it's exactly the Greeks' argument is that, writing, if you write stuff down, yeah, like then you have it, right? But then you don't have to remember it anymore. Think of the store of memory that that bards and singers had, right? Like the dudes who used to go around and recite the Iliad, right? That kind of feat of memory gets lost in a print culture. Anyway, I'm just go off about that. But just again to kind of remind people about that. Don't make the assumption that coming back to the comment about Butterbur here, I think it's and I know the Iliad wasn't recited word for word from memory. It's much more complicated than that, and it's much more kind of interactive and inventive than that. I know, but still, it's a different kind of mnemonic skill that modern people. It is very rare now in the modern world. But anyway, it's interesting though that elves are a written culture, right? They write stuff down. At least some of them do, right? Not all, I think, necessarily. Anyway, so the point that I wanted to make is that I still think it very interesting that Butterbur values his reputation as a lettered man. And I wonder if that makes him Butterbur. Like, weird? Does this make him sort of deviant in some way, right? Do people consider Butterbur strange? Is he not normal? I mean, is he queer? In that Shire sense, do the local Bree folk consider him? I mean, obviously they'd like him, they trust him. But would he be seen as strange? Would he be seen as an exception? Is he an oddball in some sense in Bree? I'm wondering. His friendship with the wizard suggests it, right? He's going against the dominant, culture of Bree in standing up for his friend Gandalf. But I wonder if the literacy is another thing. If most of the Breelanders think like Gaffer Gamgee, but he doesn't. Yeah, I wonder. Yeah. Yeah, Blue Wizard, exactly. Think of the idea of Frodo writing a book seemed odd. Not just odd, astonishing that somebody would be writing a book. That's a weird thing to be doing, right? Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, yeah. Anyway, okay. Sorry. We should stop here. Anyway, but yeah, Katron, I agree with you. It's okay. It would be okay for Butterbur to be kind of eccentric because he's from a very established and respected family. In other words, Catriona, notice the parallel that suggests, right? Compare and contrast Butterbur and Bilbo. Friend of the wizard, respected in his community, holding a position of respect in his community, and yet not sharing the same values and perspective of the rest of that community, which may or may not have some direct influence of Gandalf the wizard, behind it. I wonder. Yeah, JJ, I agree. This pretty much proves it. Butterbur is like, the center of all free people's culture, right? All roads lead to Butterbur, just like all roads cross at Bree. Makes perfect sense. All right, let's leave it there tonight. We will we'll go on to Strider popping out of the corner, right, and the confrontation between Strider and Butterbur, and see what we see there as we move forward next time. What is next week? I should be here next week. Don't forget about Thursday night. Exciting meeting on Thursday night. I hope you'll be able to join me for that. But we're gonna do our field trip. Of course, I'm gonna say goodbye to the folks on Twitter. Thanks everybody for joining me on Twitter, and feel free to join in on Twitch to watch our in-game field trip. We're gonna think about Angmar and the history of Angmar and the particular subcreation that in their adaptation that the Lotro folks have done with Angmar. So. Thanks, everybody. And I'll see the Twitter folks. I'll see you guys next week. Same time. Bye. All right.
Good evening, everyone. This is Valori here.
Yeah. Good evening. Okay. All right. We are ready to roll here. We're gonna head out. I think we're just gonna do the same thing. Travel the same path we traveled last time. That is just go up to Esteldean. Rather than traveling straight to Algair or something. We kind of got distracted from our overland trip into southern Angmar by exploring the Merivale cave. Right.
It was pretty cool, though.
It is pretty cool, and I don't apologize. I want to see the sights, and I'm really interested in, and I want to think through some more sort of conclusions about the depiction of Angmar and how they've represented it, because it's a fascinating element of the game, and of course we should remind people, especially people who are sort of new to Lotro, like even newer than I am, that Angmar was the original, like the original part of the game, like that. When the game first came out, the primary with the Shadows of Angmar was the primary plot line. So when we're looking at the Angmar stuff, we're really looking at the oldest central storyline.
What can I do for you?
Of the whole game, which, oh, yeah, look at this. He's never even.
We going to Esteldean or Algair?
Let's go to Esteldean.
Okay.
And then we'll go cross country again from there. Yeah. See, oh, Ambrosius Aurelianus, you missed the link. Okay, there's the registration link, Ambrosius Aurelianus. That's for the Thursday night meeting. I'll put it in the Twitch chat too.
Oh, yes.
Again, boom. Exciting announcements and talking about developments and Signum stuff. Really fun, cool stuff.
I'm excited.
Greetings.
Lots of things have been happening lately. And I am even more sleep deprived than usual, but it's been really good. It's been really good. Very exciting.
Yeah, looking forward to that.
Yeah. Okay. All right. So we're gathering in Esteldean. Yeah. So Angmar. So, the choice just, I was realizing that, we were beginning to explore Angmar last time, but didn't really kind of talk about the big picture. And I'd like to talk a little more about the big picture. Angmar is a really interesting choice for like the initial villain, the initial enemy, in the first installment of the game. And, I think we're mostly here.
Yeah.
We'll keep going. All right. All right.
Those lagging behind, we're going east again as last time.
Yep, we're going east. So we'll cut through, come out the other side of the pass, and then we're going to go through the main gate again with this big statues.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, so Angmar. Now, the main thing, so it can't be denied that in this opening segment of the game, in the Shadows of Angmar part, they're taking sort of bigger liberties than they're taking, or at least a whole different brand of liberties, different species of liberties with the story than they do in some other places, right? So, like, for instance, compare and contrast the Angmar storyline with, say, the Moria storyline, right? Which was Am I right in remembering that Moria was the next big expansion after the Shadows of Angmar?
Yes. Yeah, that's about when I joined in the game. And yeah, Moria was about the reclamation of Moria by the dwarves that came after the Fellowship had already sort of burned their way through it.
Exactly. So, in other words, they weren't departing from the story. They were adding to it, right? Because, you don't know what was happening in Moria after the Fellowship left, right? Who's to say exactly what was happening? We got a very
brief tour.
Yeah, exactly.
And we do know that the dwarves were, after the Council of Elrond, we know that the dwarves were sort of wondering, well, whatever happened to Balin and all those guys?
Right, exactly. So that there would be some of the dwarves of the Lonely Mountain who might have decided to engage in this kind of an expedition is perfectly well in keeping with what Glowin reports, as you say, at the Council of Elrond. There's even, I love the line I kept thinking of throughout the time that I have spent in Moria in game is, when Gandalf is reading the Book of Mizarble and says, so ended the attempt to retake Moria. It was valiant but foolish. The time has not yet come. And it was just kind of funny in the context of the game to be like, the time had not yet come. They were just like a year early, like if they'd just waited a hair longer, the time would have come. They weren't wrong.
It's not wrong in that respect.
Exactly. It's not wrong. It's just the time had not yet come. Not quite come. But anyway, again, but again, the whole point is that you can see that the whole concept of the central plot line of the Moria expansion, it doesn't deviate from this. It doesn't. There are only a few small ways in which it actually contradicts what was said in the books, and of course the same thing with Rohan, right? Throughout the and because that was the next big expansion, right? Or did Mirkwood come after? No, that was part of the.
The Moria, when we got the Dimril Dale
thing.
Yeah.
Right. Yeah.
Yeah.
So, Right. So with the Rohan expansion, well, and Mirkwood too, right? There, what we're getting is, we know we're told a few, small things about stuff that happened there in Rohan, outside the very narrow path that the narrative follows. And the story is kind of filling in.
But we did get narrative there.
Exactly. Like, we know that there are some people who support Wormtongue, and we know that he is trying to sort of, put himself into power, and the things that are happening around in Rohan are kind of the things that we might imagine and all these other things. So what I'm getting back around to here is that in the original Angmar story, they took a different kind of liberty with the story, right? Angmar, there's never any indication that Angmar has risen again. They're kind of doing something which is just flat contradictory to the book. Like, Angmar has fallen, and unlike the South, Angmar will not rise again. So it's from its core concept, this whole plot line asks us to sort of accept, to take one sort of fairly big step, right? The step of saying, well, like, imagine Angmar kind of is rising again, right? It's not that the Witch King has come back, because we know he's busy elsewhere. In fact, right, you meet him in the quest line pretty early on in the epic quest line. So, we know what he's occupied with, and he's not ruling up here, with his iron crown and whatever. But, there's enough remnants of old Angmar up here that they're becoming a power again. And that, again, that's not really, that didn't really happen in the book, but it's fine. I've never found that a step I'm unwilling to take. And
it would have been boring to go to Angmar and find no conflict at all. Right,
exactly. And to me, the great value of it is exactly as JJ was just suggesting on Discord here. Angmar is one of those places that I always wanted to hear more about. Yeah, like the very name of Angmar was one that I always found tantalizing isn't quite the right word, but I found that name to have a kind of intriguing, this sort of mythical significance, right? Like, it's that name just had this kind of resonance, in part because, like, I knew that there were stories there that I just wasn't being told and didn't know about, right? So that's why I think I'm so willing to take the step to be like, oh yeah, okay, it's fine. Angmar's risen again. No problems. I'm with you, right? And the primary reason that I'm with them is that they are, like, sort of enabling a fantasy, right? That is to look at a story that is fascinating but untold, right? To explore a land whose very name has this resonance within the story, and it's really fun to kind of visit here. Anyway, so for that reason, also, though, the very significance of the name, and the sort of the role that it had, or the role that it played in my imagination in the story, kind of set the bar pretty high for me. I was really interested to come to Angmar. One of the things that I liked about it from the very beginning, that is about the storyline, long before I got to Angmar, from way back in book 1 of the epic quest line in Bree, which is where I first started playing.
The Strider's thing with the
Amdir plot and the Angmarim influencing the Blackwold ruffians and stuff, as we were just looking at in Breeland. To me, that's really interesting, right? What I really liked about the sort of direction that they took that from an adaptation standpoint is not to just sort of expand on something that Tolkien says, or to fill in a story around the edge, but rather to kind of I don't know, make history come alive, right? The
Yeah.
way that they parallel what happens in Angmar here with the things that we're told about what did happen in Angmar before. Even to the way in which the kingdom of Rhudaur is kind of seduced away from its, Dunedain roots and comes to serve the Iron Crown. That's the way that we're seeing them infiltrate among the Blackwold ruffians, and we're seeing sort of echoes of that, right?
Yeah.
In a later age, it's not the same thing, but seeing echoes of that in a later age, and I think that's really interestingly done.
Which is similar to how history really works, honestly.
yeah. Well, and especially in Tolkien, we get that all the time.
Oh yes. So it's not a stretch, and I do like the fact that we're encountering Angmar, and it talks about Angmar rising to power, but we're looking around and going, oh, not yet, they're not.
Right.
Everything's still kind of disorganized, and nobody really, everyone's sort of following their own thing and having tantrums. Everything's on the loose, everything's untethered, everything's crumbling apart and decaying.
Yes. Yeah. Yeah, so it's really interesting to see. So thinking, in terms of that, in terms of these, these sort of the legends and histories, right? Look at these first two elements of Angmar that we've seen. First, we've got the valley that we just came through, right? This path that we just came through, which is still a path, and though we've got this sort of blasted, cracked ground, right, that we've been following. So we've got like this path of evil through this otherwise relatively fertile valley here. But we also had those like ginormous spiders that we were, galloping through and everything. So
the blight-scarred path.
Yeah, exactly. So we have this sort of corrupted fauna, right? Those diggers up there don't look healthy, and the spiders certainly don't look healthy. Then we come to here. We've got these orcs, right? This little orc camp with these big siege equipment that they're building, right? So they're building this siege equipment in order to bring it down into the North Downs. To attack from the north. So we get this idea of an orc army that's preparing for an assault down from the north, again, just like the bad old days, right? And then... yeah, go ahead.
But we're already seeing that things are not going well. What we have are these Blogmol orcs just complaining and whining, and nobody knows what they're supposed to do or why they're doing it. Like one of the was on my feed, they were talking about how, it's all well and good to say the trolls are going to push it, but what are we going to do in the daytime? Right. We have to push it.
Right. We
can already see that things are not going smoothly.
Yes, exactly. I do like the fact that the orcs up here are kind of incompetent, right? And this is not it's not exactly a well-oiled war machine that we're seeing up here when we do get up here to Angmar. JJ, I agree. It is kind of comical to me. The whole siege weaponry thing, it seems to me a bit of a joke anyway. Right? I mean, apart from the fact that it's not being done very well, it's a little odd. Why do it at all, right? Seriously? Like this siege tower right here on those wheels.
It's going to go up that steep hill that we just
Right, exactly. Down. How are you going to push that guy with trolls? Okay, you could push that with trolls. But seriously, you're going to shove this little buggy all the way across the North Downs? Right, and what over the mountains or
the switchback path over to Estelden?
Exactly. Is that like what are you planning to do with this? It's not even like a city right over the pass that you're gonna go to. There's it's the whole thing is kind of puzzling. But again, that in itself is kind of charming, right? There's this sort of charming cluelessness about the orc initiative up here.
It's like King Arthur's Knights nonsense here.
Yeah. And then there's the Maravel, which we met before too. And thinking of we were talking about the sort of the connection to Thuringwethil, right? And the vampires. So again, that seems to me a very characteristic sort of Angmar touch, Lotro Angmar touch, this ancient stories come alive kind of angle, that we get a lot in the Angmars. It's really kind of the the whole nature of the Angmar story. That once more the kingdom of the evil kingdom of Angmar is emerging. There are distant legends that are still told of it, and its name is a name of dread. But now it is rising again.
Several hints of the fact that Angmar was just sort of sleeping, waiting for its second coming. Like all the really evil, nasty stuff down there hadn't actually been killed, but we're just sort of sitting around waiting.
Yes.
to wake up again. So
yes.
I like that aspect of it.
Yeah, me too. Let's see. Hang on at this crossroads. I'm now debating. Which way should we go, do you think? Should we go north and come out through the orc camp up there, or should we turn to the west and come out in Algair?
If we go up north, we have a choice of going through an orc camp or an Angmar camp.
Right. Either of which are fun, but...
For high levels.
Right.
Gothic, your spear with heads on it and the flies buzzing around, that's just really creepy. Well done. You live up to your name.
Oh, wow, yeah. That's hardcore right there. Wow.
Yeah, that's totally hardcore.
Whoa, yeah.
Good thing the smell's going behind you when you're riding,
Yeah,
that would be
absolutely.
the advantage of riding really fast.
Yeah, you might want to keep it at a canter.
Other people are showing off theirs.
Uh-huh. Okay.
Yeah. I don't have one. It's tasteless.
You don't have cosmetic skulls mounted behind you on your horse? Okay.
No.
Yeah. Cool.
It wouldn't go with my outfit.
All right. Let's go towards Algair. I've decided. Let's go towards Algair, and
probably better for the lower levels.
Well, and then that way we can start there next time. So.
I just did that one on Gladden with Jonathan, riding through the two camps to finish the Watcher quest, and oh boy, did I have a kite about a mile long following.
Yes.
Very, very Benny Hill moment. Now, I think we can ride this... never mind, I can see the camp. I made the mistake of riding up the cliff. There.
Yes.
It did get me to the camp. I just got a lot of broken things on the way.
Right. I've always been surprised in this area how green it is.
Yeah.
All the trees and stuff. I was surprised by that. I was... When I first came through here... Or rather, when I first came to Angmar, I didn't come by this pass. I came by the other pass, the Worm and Drake pass.
Yeah.
And that, felt satisfyingly,
dark
and sinister, right? Which, of course, this is looking at the map. It's down the roads south that we've just intersected here. That's the one that comes out there through the other pass.
Yeah.
And it's covered in dragons, essentially. The idea that the boundary is guarded by, by worms, guarded by dragons, is interesting, right? Reminds me of
that rare elite one, of course.
Right, yeah, exactly.
That one took me by surprise.
Took me by surprise too. I think 3 times. But yeah. Anyway, I think that the JJ is asking, could the Earthkin be stone giants of a sort? I think that's the only kind of justification for them. My suspicion is that that's kind of the idea, given that there are giants in Middle-earth, sort of, briefly, in The Hobbit, that were trying to do giantish kinds of things. They've got elfish ears. We've looked at them before down, in the other valley.
Yeah, in Lonelands.
Down by Estildane. I'm still not a fan of the Earthkin. I'm not outraged by the Earthkin, but I'm not really a fan.
Yeah.
It strikes me as a kind of... Like, the giants that you meet in the Misty Mountains are much more of an attempt to just simply imagine the stone giants something like as the stone giants were depicted, But Yeah. No, see, Tillian, it's the idea is not necessarily that need necessarily limit the strange creatures based on documentation, that you can't introduce anything that wasn't explicitly introduced by Tolkien. Though they do try in general to be careful about that in Lotro. I agree with you, or with what you're implying, I think, that isn't necessarily, mandatory. I don't find the Earthkin work very well. I don't know how to fit them. I don't know what to do
Well,
with
they
them.
don't seem to be borrowed from any of the mythologies that Tolkien was a fan of. I mean, that would be a
Right.
different matter if they had introduced Svartalf or something like that from Norse mythology, or
Right.
something from Beowulf or something. It'd be a different matter, because those were sources that he held close to his heart and drew a lot from.
Yeah. So they are harder to understand, harder to fit in, harder to see how they're meant to work and what they're sort of meant to do.
Their mechanism.
Yeah, they're a little awkward. But anyway, let's carry on. So here we are in the unexpectedly fertile. Do you think we're meant to understand that they, by their presence here, are helping to keep this bit of Angmar green and growing?
That would make some sort of sense, but I think also what we're looking at, the type of green that we're seeing is green that is the kind of green that survives in really harsh climates.
Right.
Like the scrubby grass here looks like the kind of weeds that you find growing in pavement, as if it was luxury dirt.
Right.
Despite the fact all of your freesia have died.
Right.
And the type of cedary pine trees, and they look a little rusty and sparse. Those are the kinds of trees that you see next to oceans and salt marshes, things where a lot of things can't grow.
Right.
But now look down here. We got the dead trees down here.
Yes.
And there's only little patches of scrubby grass all over the place. This place has been just desolated by whatever blight is taking over Angmar.
Yes, and you could mistake it at first for just rocky, right? But the dead trees are kind of a giveaway. This used to be a greener valley.
And this isn't winter. These are blighted trees. These are bone white blighted trees.
Yeah. I want to look at our banners here first.
Similar to the ones that we. Oh, that's the instance camp over here. So
this is a dragon.
Where?
Up here next to the.
Where are you now? I'm not sure. Oh, yes. I see it now. I'm sorry. I thought you were looking at the ones at the bottom of the hill.
No, I'm still here. Is there anything? Well, no, those are just colors.
Yeah.
And I think the tattered ones are like the banners of their defeated enemies, aren't they? Something like that.
Yeah. The Trevgalorg.
That's right.
Have we found the root language that they're using for the Ogair? Do we know what that was? Or?
I don't think. Do they have these hillmen as? They connect them ultimately through the Brewand and down. Yeah, it's a generally Celtic thing, right?
Yeah, it sounds very Scottish Gaelic to me.
Yeah.
Wanted a second opinion, though. Which would make sense. So these are the hardy, tough people up north.
Yeah.
See, furthering my theory that Bremen are Yorkshiremen.
Okay, so when I came here with Griffith, it was the first time I noticed this. What do you think this is? The wall.
Oh, the wall? Oh, dang, I didn't even notice that.
Yeah, I didn't notice that either. I came up here, like Wiggin had completely finished the epic line up in Angmar, and I'd never noticed it. And then I came here with Grifflet, and I was looking around like Grifflet does, and I was like, holy cow, there's a big castle on the hill.
Jeez, once again proving I can be in this game for so many years and still get surprised. It's not Rudaurin.
No, it doesn't. It does not look like this, certainly not like the standard Numenorian ruins that we've seen. I don't think we can get up among these ruins. I've tried and failed.
I believe it.
I can't get closer.
It's kind of Karn Doom looking.
Yeah, Mungli, I suspect it may be an old border wall for Angmar. That makes some sense to me. It looks more like a boundary to keep people out than it looks like something encircling this valley.
This valley is almost this castle's defense, if it is a castle.
Well, right, this pass, right? Because presumably,
Yeah.
I mean, this village hardly looks ancient.
No.
So,
although hard to tell with the rate things would be rotting, you'd have to replace it pretty regularly.
Right, exactly. I mean, these people could have been settled here for 1,000 years for all we know, but there's no clear sign. I mean, there's no stonework or anything that suggests
no permanent residence, anything here.
Yeah. So I would think that this would be the border of Angmar, and that this wall was designed to guard against the pass here.
Yes. That makes sense.
Yeah.
So, yeah, what's on the other side of this wall? Is there any way to see what's on there? Or do we have to go up the hill?
I think just to the left of
on the other side
is the pass that goes down into the plain from Algyre. So,
yeah,
either that really should have been walled also, or it used to be walled and the wall is just removed.
I recall there's a lot of runes out there. So.
Yeah. Well, we'll take a look. However, it's JJ, I agree. It does really look like a Great Wall of China kind of boundary there. Notice how it joins against the hill up here on the what is it? Sort of eastern
side. Stonework.
Yeah. Yeah. So no, I think it's just designed to protect Angmar from this approach from the south.
And keep out the riffraff.
Yeah, exactly. Well, we will begin next time in Algyre, and we'll explore here more thoroughly next time. I should let everybody go. It's almost the stroke of midnight here on the East Coast, so we should let people go. But thanks everybody for joining us, and I look forward to seeing you guys again soon. I am going to have class tomorrow night. That is, we're going to have the Mythgard Academy class, the War of the Ring class tomorrow night. We're going to get to meet Faramir for the first time. So that'll be fun. And then, of course, there are the special Thursday night sessions, special new announcements about Signum University, and then moving on. So thanks, everybody, and I will see you guys soon. Bye now.
Bye. Good night.
Good night. Thanks for joining me on this epic exploration of The Lord of the Rings and of Standing Stone's video adaptation of Tolkien's story. If you are having even half the fun I'm having on this journey, I hope you will consider supporting the project by donating at signumuniversity.org/fund.